2 nights later, King Robert decided to slip away into the city for one of his adventures. This was not unusual. He often vanished with a few of his close drinking companions or bodyguards to frequent the brothels and alehouses, sometimes returning bruised or with a black eye from a brawl. Ned hated it, but he had little power to stop him. On this particular night, though, Ned saw an opportunity. He knew the city watch that would guard the king had been paid off by Baelish in various ways. If Ned could intercept them or gather from them a piece of evidence, some direct order from Baelish to sow strife, he might gain what Robert demanded, ironclad proof. So Ned enlisted the help of Jory Castle and 2 of his best men. They would follow the king's retinue, staying far enough behind to remain unnoticed, but close enough to overhear. If Baelish's men had instructions to speak falsehoods about the Lannisters or the Starks, or to lead the king to a situation that might inflame tensions, Ned wanted it on record. Jory, loyal and true as always, agreed without hesitation. They set off into the night, the moon high and bright, the city's winding streets full of flickering lanterns and the sounds of laughter, drunken arguments, barking dogs, and rattling wagon wheels. They lost the king's trail for a time near a district of taverns by the mud gate. Robert's laughter echoed among the crowds. Ned's men had to linger, weaving carefully among the throng so as not to draw attention. At last, they saw the king's party moving toward a less reputable set of establishments, presumably to see some of the delights that Robert so enjoyed. Jory and his men followed discreetly, but they soon realized they had competition. Another cluster of men in dark cloaks seemed to be following the king's retinue as well. Jory recognized one of them by the shape of his shoulders and the silver in his beard, a gold cloak loyal to Baelish. They approached an alley where the men could slip out of view. Jory's heart pounded. If Baelish's men were planning to orchestrate an incident that would implicate Lannister or Stark in an attempt on the king's life, or stoke Robert's anger, they could do it here in these dark streets. Jory signaled his men to close in. They pressed themselves against a rough wooden door to overhear the conversation. The gold cloaks were muttering about Lord Baelish's instructions. Something about making sure the king saw what was needed. A subtle hint that might or might not refer to forging more tension with the Lannisters. Jory leaned closer. One of the men whispered, "And if it goes as planned, the king will come away from this night despising both the queen's brother and the Starks. Then Lord Baelish can step in to calm things." Next, the wolf and lion tear each other's throats out. Jory felt a surge of anger. There it was, plain and simple. He began to nod at his men, urging them to slip away so they could inform Ned immediately. But just then, one of the gold cloaks heard a scuffle of boots. He turned, saw Jory's men, and shouted. The clash was sudden and brutal. Steel rang out under the moonlight. Jory was an accomplished fighter, but there were more of Baelish's men than he expected. Blades flashed. A grunt and a cry echoed in the alley. Jory slashed one guard across the arm, but another struck at Jory's flank. He reeled back, driving his shoulder into the second guard's midriff, sending him stumbling. One of Jory's men took a dagger to the throat. A third was cut down from behind. Jory himself took a savage cut across the thigh. But they managed to kill or incapacitate 2 of Baelish's men before the others fled. The city watch came running, but it was uncertain whose side they belonged to. By the time Jory and the surviving guards were able to limp away, they had the suspicion that half the gold cloaks would report any wrongdoing to Baelish first. But they also had a crucial bit of knowledge. Baelish had indeed given direct instructions to stoke the king's hatred of the Lannisters and the Starks both. This was not rumor or speculation but overheard speech from men in his pay. That might be the final piece needed. When Jory told Ned what had happened, Ned felt a pang at the loss of the 2 men who died in the alley. Good northern lads, loyal to the bone. He bowed his head, mourning them. But the news that Baelish's men had confirmed the accusations in so many words lit a fire in him. Now was the time to confront Peter Baelish with the king's justice. This needed to be done carefully, however. Robert was still out carousing, and if Ned made a public arrest at court, it could provoke a fight with the city watch. He decided to gather the evidence, the letter from Pycelle, the coded references from John Aaron's journal, the testimony from Jory. Then he would go to the king in the morning. But fate conspired to accelerate his plans. For that same night, while Robert was away, Baelish launched a preemptive strike of his own. Perhaps he had learned through his channels that the net was closing around him. Perhaps one of the gold cloaks from that alley had escaped and given him warning. Regardless, he knew that Ned was onto him, and that it was only a matter of time before Robert was convinced. Baelish's men tried to strike at Ned in the Tower of the Hand. A group of them, wearing gold cloaks but loyal to Baelish alone, attempted to breach the tower on the pretext of searching for contraband. It was an odd excuse in the middle of the night, and Ned's men recognized it as an attack. Steel clashed in the corridors. The cry of Winterfell echoed. Ned, awakened from uneasy sleep, grabbed his sword. Ser Roderick, though older, had enough fight in him to help repel the assault. The fighting was fierce, and the corridor flickered with the light of overturned torches. In the confusion, Ned glimpsed the face of one of the watchmen he had seen whispering with Baelish earlier that week. Arya, roused by the commotion, tried to sneak out of her chambers with needle in hand, but Ned ordered her to stay put. Sansa sobbed in her room, accompanied by a pair of terrified handmaidens. The hush of the night erupted into screams and the clang of swords. Finally, Ned's men triumphed, leaving half a dozen gold cloaks dead on the floor. 2 of Ned's men died as well. The hall reeked of blood. By the time the alarm was raised, the fighting was over. Ned felt a swirl of fury and resolution. This was the final straw. He dispatched a messenger to King Robert, wherever he might be, and to Lord Barristan Selmy, demanding their presence at the Tower of the Hand immediately. At daybreak, Robert arrived, bleary-eyed, reeking of ale, accompanied by a handful of loyal men and Lord Renly. Barristan came soon after. Ned confronted Robert with the evidence, the bodies of the gold cloaks, the testimony of Jory Castle about the men's confession in the alley, the coded letter that Pycelle had found, and the references in John Aaron's notes. The king looked around, his eyes heavy-lidded, taking in the carnage. He turned pale. Gods, Ned, are you telling me Baelish did this? That he orchestrated an attack on the hand of the king? Ned said quietly, Yes, your grace, and I have ample cause to believe he is the one behind all the rumors and tensions between my house and the Lannisters. He manipulated the entire realm for his own gains. Robert's gaze flickered from the blood-stained corridor to the papers Ned held out. Show me, he growled. He read them quickly, scowling. Lord Renly peered over his shoulder. Barristan Selmy, stony-faced, confirmed that men under Baelish's influence had been seen skulking about. Ned recited the overheard conversation from the alley as relayed by Jory. He summarized how Baelish's men had tried to kill them in the tower last night. For a moment, Robert seemed at a loss. Then he exploded in a fury. Gods be damned. Peter Baelish, that worm. I'll have his head. Where is he now? No one knew. Baelish had not slept in his chambers that night. He was nowhere in the Red Keep, nor in his brothels. Varys' spies later revealed that Baelish had fled the city with a small retinue of personal guards, likely heading for the Vale or perhaps the Fingers. Robert roared, commanding that riders be sent in pursuit. He hammered a fist against the wall, cursing that the city might now be in upheaval without its master of coin. He cursed Baelish for the betrayal, cursed Ned for not warning him sooner, cursed the gods for not letting him enjoy a single night's pleasure without the realm collapsing. Cersei Lannister arrived shortly thereafter, with Jaime at her side and the King's Guard in tow, demanding to know why the king was shouting and what had occurred. Robert glared at her, though not with the hatred Ned might have expected if he thought the Lannisters were behind this. Your damned master of coin is a traitor, Robert spat. Jaime raised a golden eyebrow, perplexed. Cersei's green eyes narrowed with deep suspicion. She demanded an explanation. Ned quietly explained. The queen seemed stunned, for once at a loss for words. Baelish's flight confirmed the accusations more convincingly than any words could. Jaime's face twisted into a sneer. That sly little wretch, he said. He pointed the finger at us for everything from the attempt on the Stark boy's life to the murder of Jon Arryn, all to distract from his own manipulations. Despite the day's violence, Ned felt a faint stir of relief. If the Lannisters now realized that Baelish was the prime mover behind the conflict, perhaps that would reduce the tension between Stark and Lannister. Or perhaps not. Jaime's eyes flicked to Ned. "We have a score to settle, Stark. My brother is still in your wife's custody, is he not?" Ned nodded stiffly. "Then we are not friends, you and I," Jaime said. "Even if Baelish's meddling is partially to blame for how matters escalated, the injustice stands. Tyrion is innocent of trying to kill your boy." Ned studied Jaime's face. "Bran was pushed from that tower. He saw something that day. Whether your brother was behind it or not, we never found conclusive proof. The dagger that was used in the later attempt apparently belonged to Baelish. Perhaps we have found our culprit after all." Jaime gave a slight shrug, not quite an admission. "If you think it was Baelish who tried to kill your son, then that is your new target. But your wife abducted Tyrion in good faith or not, and that has consequences. My father is not one to forget an insult, my lord, especially one that humiliates our house." Ned let out a tight breath. "Your father wages war with gold and steel. He must see reason if we show him this treachery from Baelish." Cersei, standing with regal poise, regarded them with cold eyes. "Lord Baelish's manipulations do not absolve either of you. The lines have been drawn, and the Lannisters do not turn the other cheek. But I will speak with the king on how to proceed. In the meantime, I trust you will not further degrade relations by trifling with my brother's freedom." Robert, leaning against the wall with a scowl, snapped, "I'm in charge here, woman. Don't you forget it. This matter with Tyrion must be resolved as well. But first, we must find Baelish. I want his head on a spike outside the gates. If he's gone to ground, we'll track him. I'll have every gold cloak who was loyal to him stripped of rank or executed for treason. We'll find men who truly serve the crown. We can't have this city overrun by traitors. Gods be good. I'm surrounded by fools and snakes." In the days that followed, King's Landing descended into a new wave of chaos, though different in nature from what Baelish had orchestrated. Now there was a purge. The gold cloaks were scrutinized, tested for loyalty, with many arrested or cast out. Some fled the city. At the same time, Robert demanded the small council rework the finances. They discovered gaping holes in the ledgers, evidence of Baelish's elaborate sleight of hand with the realm's gold, likely used to buy alliances among the City Watch and beyond. Varys offered suggestions for a new master of coin, but Robert roared that he would not pick a man just because Varys recommended him. Pycelle washed his hands of the matter, feigning age and ignorance. Renly tried to step into the vacuum, but Robert wanted no Baratheon near the kingdom's purse strings. Tensions soared, but not strictly between Lannister and Stark anymore. Everyone feared the next betrayal might come from anywhere. Amid this environment, Ned took the time to pen ravens to his wife at the Eyrie, updating her. He explained that Tyrion Lannister might be innocent, that the real culprit behind the dagger and the impetus for conflict was Baelish. He urged her to treat Tyrion fairly, and if possible, to keep him alive. "We cannot afford to deepen hostilities with House Lannister, not when the real Viper has fled," he wrote. "We must bargain if we hope to prevent open war." Robert, though raging at times, seemed somewhat placated that the blame for the tension was not entirely the Lannisters' fault. He had always disliked the Lannisters, especially Cersei, but he despised betrayal even more. He was wrathful that someone in his own council had made a fool of him. Cersei was cunning enough to seize upon the moment. She soothed Robert's ego, saying that if Baelish was responsible for the wedge between the crown and the north, then it might be beneficial to quell the friction with House Stark. After all, the real culprit had fled, so it was in the king's interest to restore unity among his powerful lords paramount. She did this while also reminding Robert that the Lannisters were wealthy and capable of assisting with the kingdom's debts, now that Baelish's illusions had collapsed. Ned took advantage of this lull. He and Robert spoke privately about the matter of Tyrion. Robert admitted that while he disliked Lannisters, he did not want war with Tywin. He asked Ned to write to Catelyn again, urging that Tyrion be brought to King's Landing to face a fair hearing. Ned did so, but the response would take time. Meanwhile, Cersei pressed for an official condemnation of Baelish as a traitor so that no house would harbor him. Robert agreed. He sent riders and ravens to the Vale, the Riverlands, even to White Harbor, urging them to arrest Peter Baelish on sight. The king also demanded that Stannis Baratheon, who had left the city some time ago, return to help set the finances in order. But word reached them that Stannis had gone to Dragonstone, apparently suspicious of the parentage of Cersei's children. That was a separate storm brewing on the horizon. Jaime remained in the city, presumably to watch over his sister, but also to guard the king. He and Ned shared a frosty civility. They would pass each other in the corridors, nod stiffly. Jaime never let Ned forget that Tyrion was still captive in the Eyrie. Ned never let Jaime forget that the attempt on Bran's life still demanded justice. Even if Baelish was behind it, the involvement of the Lannisters in pushing Bran from that tower remained in question. Ned refused to let that go entirely. Some nights, Ned would wake from a half-sleep, haunted by the image of Bran lying broken in the snow, and wonder if some deeper secret had still not come to light. But for now, the immediate danger from Baelish was contained, or so it seemed. Weeks passed. The small council worked feverishly to mend the realm's finances. Varys reported that sightings of Baelish were rumored in Gulltown, then in Lannisport, then even in Braavos. It seemed the man had a knack for vanishing. Robert fumed and threatened more dire punishments if the man was ever found. Still, the realm was calmer than it had been in months. Without Littlefinger to fuel the flames, House Stark and House Lannister found themselves in a truce of sorts, albeit uneasy. But Baelish was not idle in exile. His cunning had always thrived on adversity. He traveled in secret to the Fingers first, confirming that his small keep was safe. Then he used ships to move between ports, forging alliances with lesser lords who had their own grievances against the crown or wanted a share of chaos that might benefit them. He spread rumors that the king was incompetent, that Ned Stark was seizing power, that the Lannisters would soon attempt to supplant Robert entirely. And from these rumors, Baelish gleaned men who might be loyal to him alone. He set about creating a small network of sellswords and cutthroats, financed by hidden caches of gold he had siphoned from the royal treasury over the years. If he could not rule King's Landing from the inside, he would control it from the outside. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Ned was contending with a new problem: the forging of a genuine peace. The Queen insisted that Ned remain as hand, if only to keep Robert content. Jaime prowled the corridors. Pycelle tottered about, complaining of his advanced age, but occasionally offering bits of counsel about the realm's trade agreements. Renly tried to maneuver for influence, but he lacked Baelish's cunning. Varys glided about, collecting secrets. The city breathed, as cities do, with the tension of uncertain times. Arya continued her sword lessons with Syrio Farrell, though Ned questioned whether this was still safe. Sansa resumed her fantasies of courtly life, though her illusions had been badly shaken by the violence in the Tower of the Hand. Robert attempted to regain some semblance of normalcy, announcing a tournament in honor of the new hand, that is, Ned. Ned promptly refused to have a lavish tournament at the realm's expense, citing the precarious finances. Robert, disappointed, grumbled but let it go. The city's mood was calmer, if still restless. Then a raven arrived from the Eyrie with surprising news. Tyrion Lannister, aided by the sellsword Bronn, had won his trial by combat in the Vale and had gone free. Catelyn, chastened by the knowledge of Baelish's cunning, had offered Tyrion a more courteous arrangement, but events had spun beyond her control. Now Tyrion was returning to his family, presumably heading for Casterly Rock or King's Landing. Ned braced himself for the Lannisters' reaction. Would Tyrion push for vengeance? Or would he also realize that Baelish had orchestrated the entire fiasco? As it turned out, Tyrion arrived in King's Landing while Ned was in council with Robert, Cersei, and the others. He strode in wearing dusty clothes, accompanied by Bronn and a small retinue of men loyal to House Lannister. Jaime embraced his brother, clearly relieved. Cersei eyed Tyrion with something akin to wariness and quickly demanded a private audience. But Robert, surprising them all, insisted Tyrion remain in the council chamber so they could address the matter plainly. Tyrion offered a disarming bow, his mismatched eyes flicking between the king, Ned, and Cersei. "I suppose I have many to thank for my predicament," he said. "My abduction, my trial in the Eyrie, and my release. I hear we have a new scapegoat in absentia. Lord Baelish, is it?" Robert grunted. "He's a traitor to the realm, dwarf. You'll speak his name with caution, unless you want to join him in condemnation." "Oh, I do not," Tyrion said. "I only wish to remark how delightful it is that we can now blame everything on him." He turned to Ned. "I assume, Lord Stark, that you now accept my innocence in the attempt on your son's life?" Ned inclined his head. "I do. The dagger was said to be yours, but it appears Baelish lied about that. We have reason to believe the blade was his, or that he arranged the entire thing."